Thank you, Hani. And good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here moderating this morning. I'm a morning person, so for you who are not, I'm sorry if I have so much energy this early in the morning. To make this session interesting and for you, maybe you can help me by actually asking some good questions. We have an amazing panelist with us this morning, come from a very rich and diverse background from in entrepreneurship, angel investors, VCs, and they're from a different part of our ecosystem, from governments and universities. So with that, I'll start with my introduction. I'm Dana Attar. I spent my last 20 years in my career in healthcare technology side, working on transforming our healthcare system and hopefully making it smarter, still work in progress. I have been on both sides of the corporate side and on the startup, and I am the co-host of the MIT Talks podcast. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers to do a quick introduction of them and their role. So will we start with Dr. Vanessa Chan?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Chan. I'm the Chief Commercialization Officer and the Director of the Office of Technology Transitions at the U.S. Department of Energy. Similar to Dana, I've worked in many ecosystems. I was a partner at McKinsey & Company, where I co-led the innovation practice, helping big companies commercialize their technologies. I also did my own startup, was an angel investor, invested about a dozen startups, was on the board of 5 of them. And currently I'm on the leave of absence from Penn Engineering, where I was teaching entrepreneurship to students. And here at DOE, my role is to drive commercial impact from all of the research that is being done across the Department of Energy. And as part of that, I sponsor quite a few startups and incubators through my program.
All right, thank you. Habib, would you like to go next?
Thank you. And I am a morning person now that I have a 2.5-year-old son at home. I have to be. I've been a founder. I started 3 companies, and I've been shifting between both Boston and the Middle East. So started companies in different markets. Right now, I'm managing E14 Fund, which we started about 8 years ago at the Media Lab initially, now across MIT, as a deep tech investing fund with a deep integration on campus, working with early scientists and helping them spin off companies. But I think it's always, like many of my friend entrepreneurs in the Middle East, I always consider myself at heart an activist. And I think today every single founder and entrepreneur is an activist in their own right, creating an impact on this world. So it's always something that comes back close to my heart.
Thank you, Habib. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here with everybody. My name is Michael Carney. I'm a principal at the Engine. My background is in the energy space. I helped launch an energy storage startup called Ambry. I led business development there for about 5 years. Made the jump over to the Engine about 3 years ago, as the Engine was getting spun up by MIT as an initiative to support tough tech founders that are translating breakthrough science and engineering research into commercial reality and impact. We do that through the provision of capital. We're a venture fund, and we pair that with infrastructure. We have 30,000 square feet of space, lab space, office space, where you've got a bunch of equipment where you can very quickly do some of your early stage experimentation coming out of the lab. And we are currently building up about 200,000 square feet of space in Kendall Square to expand on that. So we'll be home for many more tough tech entrepreneurs. And then we pair that with kind of deep connections across the network to surround the companies with all of the stakeholders needed to be successful, for the companies to be successful in the fullness of time. So that's a little bit about the Engine, a little bit about myself. Excited for the conversation today.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Sarah?
I am the co-founder. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi. Round 2. Good to meet everyone. Thanks for joining this early. So I appreciate it. I am the co-founder and co-managing partner of an early stage venture fund called Voyager. We invest in North America and Europe, and we back the companies building the foundational products and services of a decarbonized global economy. So climate tech, which I think folks have heard a lot of lately. And I got my start as an entrepreneur. So I co-founded a car sharing company called GetAround. I was also the founding business director of the first lab-grown meat and lab-grown leather company, Modern Meadow. And my co-founder and I really bring our background as former climate tech operators and policymakers to our work as investors, really bringing those lenses to help accelerate the success of the teams that we work with.
It's great. Thank you, Sarah. Jason?
Good morning. Good morning. I am a morning person as well.
Awesome panelist.
Yeah, and humbled to be here amongst a great group of panelists. My name is Jason Allen. I am a vice president of investments at Mass Ventures. Mass Ventures is a quasi-public venture capital firm, meaning we are independent, but we have government oversight. It's a $40 million pre-seed, seed, and seed plus investment fund that's been around for about 41 years. And our GP is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We strive to invest in companies here in Massachusetts that generate jobs and create opportunities for underestimated founders and underestimated regions within the Commonwealth. The reason why I'm on this panel is about a year ago, we pivoted our focus to more of a deep tech focus, similar to what the Engine and some of you on the panel are focused on. And we have recently made investments in that area. A little bit about me. I've been in Mass Ventures for 3 years. I have a very diverse background, non-technical. I started my journey at Divinity School, so that's a long story, but I came to Massachusetts originally to become a professor of religion. Long story there, but I've been in the startup ecosystem for just about a decade and have been in the investment ecosystem for about 5 years or so. So happy to be on the panel and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to turn it over to the audience because I see like we have almost 50 people and I'm really curious to know what background our audience is from. So if you can all just type in the chat, like if you guys come from, you're a VC today or you're angel investors or founder or what part of the ecosystem you're in, we'll like just give you 60 seconds and see how many response we'll get. We have almost 50 people on the room, that's the benefits of actually being virtual because you get to do that. All right, we have some background technologies, corporate VCs, awesome. I think it's only fair to learn. We told you who we are. It would be good to know who else is in the panel. Right, advisor, Angelique. Good morning, Angelique. Innovation developments, pre-seed funds, awesome. That's a great. Keep it coming. This is great to see the diverse backgrounds that who we were talking with this morning. So when we look at deep tech startup that's been around for quite a long time, but no, the deep tech's been around for a long time. The startup, I think we've been seeing a lot more investment happening in the last decade or so. But there's definitely some hesitation and caution from a VC perspective, because as you would know that, there's a perceived technical risk. There is expensive. It can be slow to get to where you need to be. And some people think that you have to have a PhD actually to invest in a deep tech. And there's definitely notable failures in the market as well that are all keep people very cautious about investing. So what really I'm hoping that we can accomplish today is help address these areas of the investments. So with that, I'm going to start by maybe the definition or the name, because when you look at deep tech, we get deep tech, hard tech, emerging tech, tough tech, as the Engine actually would call it. So I'm going to go to you, Michael. These names mean anything different or just like a marketing terms that you see them used around?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So at the Engine, we call it tough tech. I mean, I think that it is an umbrella for all of these different ways of categorizing breakthrough science and engineering research, right? I mean, that's I think why we're here. It's the thing that keeps us excited to get up every morning. And I think from the Engine's perspective and from my perspective, it is a way of solving some of the most intransigent problems that the world sees today. And so we call it tough tech. There's something sturdy. It's foundational to the economy, to society in many ways. But our colleagues across the board, frontier tech, deep tech, it's all one happy umbrella group of breakthrough science and engineering from my perspective.
Yeah, that's very, I think I thought it was very important to clarify that because you see a lot of different terms hovering around. So with that, as I mentioned, I think the last 10 years, we have been seeing a lot more investments. I think there's 10 more time investments in the last 10 years in deep tech than we had in the past. So it's progressing pretty fast. So Jason, I'm curious, just having from your side being a part of the earliest VC firm in the country, you have guys have a lot of experience, done a lot of investments, and you, as you mentioned, you recently have pivoted to deep tech. So how is the diligence actually process for deep tech is different from being in SaaS companies, which other things that we're used to invest in?
That's a great question. That was my prior role. I focused primarily on enterprise software, and the diligence process for enterprise software and the diligence process for deep tech is, from my perspective, different, particularly as a non-technical person. And from our perspective, we like to focus on subject matter experts that are in our network to help us validate the technology, to understand the intellectual property, and to make sure that this works. Is it real? From a software perspective, it's a completely different set of questions that you ask. But for us, we look at 8 to 10 subject matter experts that we bring in to help us understand the technology. Mm-hmm. We look at the intellectual property portfolio and we cross-reference that. And then we have a conversation and try to bring in someone who really understands that particular industry to help us do that diligence. Now, the other panelists may have more of a background in that, but for us, we're generalists by trade, and so we need to be able to have people that we can trust to help come in. The other side of that as well is we love co-investing with people who really understand what they're talking about. So love working with the engine. We've co-invested in a couple of deals there, and partnering with other deep tech firms as well from a generalist perspective. So it is a different process for me in understanding how all of these technologies work, and I've learned quite a bit. But for us, it's really important to do our standard due diligence, but also really rely on subject matter experts. And it's great to be in the Massachusetts area because there are so many who understand these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think Sarah, like you're actually, as a researcher, you're expert in the area where you're at, since you focus on the development of new negative emission technologies, leveraging biotech. So, what would be your advice to somebody who does not have that extensive background and expertise in that area? So, if I'm an investor and I have that knowledge gap, and I think Jason shared a little bit that they have a panel of experts. What other things that you can think of that you would advise people to look into to get that expertise?
Yeah, well, certainly, working with outside subject matter experts is important. It's even for somebody who's highly technical, it's tough to be technical in every area. I would say that nobody is. I think Jason's answer was spot on. Co-investing with folks who do specialize in sort of whatever vertical you're looking at. And then I think, doing your homework, like doing the work to understand what are the foundational problems in the field. What are the challenges to getting to, the next drop in cost, the next, step up in performance, and really working over a series of conversations with the teams that you're looking at backing and understanding, what's new that this team is capitalizing on. What have they been able to achieve or been able to sort of understand and then prove out that other teams haven't? And really working until you get clarity on that. So, if you don't understand fully, that just means you need to ask more and ask better questions, and probably bring in, additional expertise to help, to help augment what you're able to investigate yourself.
Then let me just build on that. When we look at when you usually attend different startup pitches, there's certain things we look for in a regular startup. When it comes to deep tech, what do you really look for at a founder or the founding team or the actual team?
Well, specific to negative emissions technologies, I look for teams that understand the challenges and the nuance of those challenges of what they're working on. Specifically negative emissions technologies, there are just fundamental sort of constraints to the problem that just come from first principles from physics and chemistry, right? You need a certain amount of surface area to contact a certain amount of CO2 to be able to capture it in the first place. You need to usually input energy. I mean, at some point in the system, you have to input energy or sort of reuse it from somewhere else. Lots of other challenges as well. Certainly like the system that you're building has to have a certain amount of like reusability and lifetime. Costs, of course, are important throughout. And so, I would be very wary of teams that say, oh, it's easy, we figured it out. We have this magical, carbon removal system and it works perfectly and, we're good to go. It's not a mature field yet. There's been really great foundational work done by some incredible teams at companies like Carbon Engineering and Climeworks. The market's still, maturing. It will take a while for the market to mature. The technologies, I think people are still really investigating what are the different approaches and where can we do things like capitalize on, energy, whether it's, waste heat or sort of low cost renewable energy, somewhere else in the system that's already being produced. Where should we be building that new sort of facilities? And what do these look like? And what are the different sort of chemical approaches we should be trying or biological approaches we should be trying? So really looking for teams that appreciate and have, I think, a very credible plan to tackle those challenges and have demonstrated at the lab scale or proof of concept scale, that their approach is credible and really can sort of explain and you can externally validate, why this is credible from the perspective of, fundamental physics and chemistry.
Yep. Vanessa, I think it's the other things when I think of a regular as a startup, one of the biggest challenges you always have is that people, run to solutions before they actually define their problems. And I think in deep tech tend to be even more severe because they have a very dominant, complex technologies that people build and trying to figure out what to solve with that. Can you speak about that a little bit and your experience in that area?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is, and I can say this, as someone who has a PhD actually from MIT, is that oftentimes the scientists and engineers who start the companies are just obsessed with that technology, and they really drive a technology push mindset. And there's not enough work that is being done on market adoption risk. And so what I've seen over the past 25 years when I've been really trying to drive commercialization across multiple ecosystems is a lack of the understanding of the techno-economics that are required in order to drive to deployment. And that's true for scientists and engineers because we're never trained on that, right? One of the things I was doing at Penn Engineering was really trying to get people more aware of value propositions and trying to really understand what is it the ecosystem is doing today. And if you've got a deep tech solution, you're oftentimes completely transforming the solution and the ecosystem. And there is a lot of inertia with companies that currently have a model that's working and they're making money. And if you're coming in to disrupt it through a brand new way of doing things, there's a need to very early on work with the entire ecosystem to make sure that they are being aligned while you work on the technology. And too oftentimes, scientists and engineers are more focused on the really hard technology they're doing and forgetting the fact that even if you build it, they may not come. In fact, they may build barriers against coming. And so that's a lot of the work I'm doing here now at the DOE, right, is really trying to drive more thinking around techno-economic analysis, market adoption risk, and so forth, because we will not be able to deploy and hit our climate goals unless we make a lot of inroads in the ecosystem side of it.
Yep.
And do you mind if I just jump in here just very quickly? I think I completely agree with what Vanessa is saying, and the sets of challenges when we think about tough tech and investing in it, it's very different than some other fields because you've got risk on technical dimensions, you've got risk on market dimensions, you've got risk on potentially, and in many cases where we are, regulatory dimensions and scale up, which I think is actually different than the technology itself. And so the team needed to approach that and identify all of the risks and plan for mitigating them simultaneously is interdisciplinary for sure. Completely agree with that point. I do think that oftentimes, and I think at the Engine, we work very closely with technical founders so that they can level up to approach all of those things. We've got a program called Blueprint where we actually go through those dimensions with technical teams to start thinking about it. And that's all pre-investment, no cost stuff. I'll put some information in the chat about it later. And we run it 2 times a year, welcome applications. But I think that there's something unique about technical founders and their relationship with the technology and understanding where they want to take it and having the vision for it that we actually think is great and want to empower. And so if you look across our portfolio, we've got a bunch of many of our founders are like the inventors of the technology who have grown into CEO roles or CTO roles and management roles. And I think in deep tech, in tough tech, that connection to the technology is really important. And being able to have a vision for where you want to take it ultimately is critical. And then surrounding yourself with the people that can help you get there, equally important.
Yep. That totally. And Habib, I think you and I talked offline about this as well. As you know, a lot of the work that you do is shifting the mindsets of the scientists. So can you speak about that from your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, at E14 Fund, our home base has been at the Media Lab for the past 8-9 years, and the Media Lab is home to also anti-disciplinary research. So it's where things have been perfected in terms of bringing in multiple disciplines into one and really seeing how things form, not just from a science perspective, but from an applicability perspective. I think earlier, one of the mottos of the Media Lab was demo or die, to contrast that with publish or perish. It's interesting because what you see is a lot of PhD postdocs are not only working on their science, but are always ready to pull up a demo. They always have something ready. There was our polish, and Sarah was actually a student at the Media Lab and knows this quite well, where as a member company, one of the largest, let's say a Pfizer or a PepsiCo, et cetera, comes in because their funders, scientists have to very quickly just pull up their work and show it off. Now, what we've seen over the years, and we've invested in about 80 companies so far, companies like Foam Labs, a few billion-dollar companies, Tulip, Affectiva, and also more on the bio and therapeutic side as well. And what we've seen is about 80% of our companies trace science back to MIT, but in a very quirky fashion. And what we call this is the scientist brain to the founder brain. So as a scientist, you're always seeking truth. You're always seeking novelty. You're always seeking peer-reviewed papers. You want to be on top of it, and you want to be always kind of very, very polished. As a founder, you're seeking patterns. You're seeking repeatability. As Vanessa said, it's about the techno-economics. How do you actually execute on that? And sometimes you hack things, and sometimes you might even go up until like faking things because you know that you're actually going to get them in the next month, but right now you need to get your story together. And so balancing the two is something that's quite unique. And we definitely don't try to push a scientist while at MIT to activate their founder. We think it's almost like you have two parts of your muscles, and you're activating one when you're working on your research, and you activate another one. We've actually also designed a few programs. One is called a VC Fellows program, which is basically a 50 to 100,000 no cap, no discount program that people get right after graduation. And we found that this helps with a bit of runway after that. So we've designed a few tools over the years. We have a program we're launching on campus as well for teaching that. But I think, going back, maybe like one particular example that's quite, that reflects this quite nicely. Company called Culture Biosciences that today is a pretty large company that works on, basically, they think of themselves as the TSMC of fermentation. The analogy that we take from semiconductor of enabling these large pharma companies, large food company to just outsource and work with others. Initially, that work, which is around bioreactors and farms and monitoring and kind of all complex processing, was almost an art/design project at Media Lab. If you Google Neri Oxman, I forget the exact word, it's like external gut. So it's almost like replicating our external intestines into this very beautiful looking wearable that you wear, and that has all this microfluidics, and it had colors in it. And the project at that time was to imagine how future would be in the future. But actually, this is the work where Will Patrick got trained on to actually think about building bioreactors and think about all the sensors that ultimately led to the creation of Culture Biosciences, which today is a household name in in biomanufacturing. And the quirky path that founders take make us such that as a fund, we're not focused on diligencing a company at the point of when they're ready. We actually think of them as a relationship. So on average, we get to meet a founder 44 months from the time we meet them until a company is formed, whether we meet them on campus or off campus. And we think this is super important. Sometimes founders come back and do something else. I remember when I was doing my last company and I was going through trouble of selling it, exiting a company, and one of the partners, a managing partner at Matrix, said a relationship between a VC and a founder is a 20-year relationship. And that's really important because a founder might come back to do something else. They might fail with a carbon capture company and come back to an alternative meat company. And that's something that's, as well as we think of the relationship between VCs and founders and experts, it is something that will be there for a long, long time.
Yep. So that's a really good advice, I think, to think about it as a long-term relationship. And I'll open this for any of you. If I'm a founder, how is it best for me to communicate some complex science to investors? Because I would think this is one of the hardest things to do, that if you're not the subject matter expert and I have this very complex science, what would your advice be to those founders?
I can start with this. I was teaching a lot of this because I think scientists and engineers aren't oftentimes able to simply talk about their work. I think first and foremost, it's really about being able to communicate the value proposition of it. And so what I normally do is I ask people, okay, why do we care, right? What problem is this solution trying to solve? Why is it the incumbent technology that's being used today not working? What are the dimensions that people are caring about? And then you benchmark your solution against all the other things out there that could be addressing the same problem. Hopefully they have a bunch of red X's against the dimensions that matter, and you've got a bunch of green checks. And I think if you can at least articulate that table, that is a big start of it, because that table is at the heart of the value proposition. And I think engineers and scientists like analysis, and so it gives them a chance to actually think about analysis, but in the end, it's really about communicating and having the elevator pitch around that table.
Yeah.
Just to add to that piece, because again, we're more generalists, I would say definitely that I agree with what Vanessa said 100%. I would also add to highlight the difference between your technology and the incumbents, and particularly, is it an order of magnitude better? Is it incrementally better? As a generalist, if someone says, this is 10 times better than the state of the art, I don't know what that means. And so compared to the existing state of the art, right? So really emphasizing those components. And I would also add, and this may be a bit of my divinity background coming in, but I like to see allegories or examples of storytelling of exactly how your technology works, but in a more of like a parable or an example or a story type form, right? And this is different for investors, right? If you have a background in that, it's completely different. But for a generalist, it would be telling a story to help us understand why this is so an order of magnitude better than the current state of the art.
I couldn't agree more with Jason's point on the storytelling. It's such an important skill that a lot of scientists have to build and work on. And at the end of the day, we're creatures of stories, right? We and I talked about this, Dana, yesterday of how storytelling is so important, not just in pitching, but in any kind of business. And I think the other thing is also drawing analogies and patterns might help. So if you have an investor who's very much experienced in semiconductor, myself and my co-founder, we spent a lot of time in semiconductor. Sometimes also drawing analogy between bio and semiconductor. We've drawn actually our own analogy, but sometimes fitting into a pattern that VCs are expecting, or sometimes helping them get there as well is another important part. And lastly, it's just making sure that you get your reference checks ready. I think that's super important. So making sure you say, oh, you know what, you need to double check that. You can talk to this particular scientist or this particular person who wrote this paper with me, or this potential customer that's going to jump on it. I think that having that checklist ready ahead of actually going and talking with investors is really, really helpful as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll amplify everything that's been said because it's right on point for us. And just I think to add a little bit of perspective, I think it's really important to know who you are talking to and what level of granularity they're going to be looking for to the best that you're able to do that. One. And then two, I think it's a real opportunity to gain credibility with the audience when you are clear about what are the specific risks to moving forward. So you're going to have technical risk, and that's just embedded in this field, right? In tough tech, deep tech, whatever. There is technical risk. Don't hide it. Come out and say exactly what it is that you need to do and to show where you are today, where you want to go, how long is it going to take you to get there, what are the resources you're going to need to get there. That's a way to build credibility with the audience, and I think with investors particularly, then they know how to be helpful for you. And so I think that's critical too.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, having the transparency.
One quick thing, I just want to just add, I'll be 10 seconds. As you can hear from these answers, if you're pitching Jason, if you're pitching Michael or Habib, it's going to be different. So that's basically, so there's no silver bullet here. We're going to be looking for different things. So that's the point.
The other thing I'm going to say is don't just rely on a pitch. The Q&A to me is where I make my investments, because a pitch is always polished. And then in Q&A is when I'm really probing to see, have they thought at multi-level dimensions below this? Mm-hmm. And the really key thing in Q&A, if there's going to be one thing you hear from me today, I really want you to take this, is please listen. You're born with 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth, and you need to use in that ratio. And I cannot tell you how many times when I was an angel investor, people came to pitch to me and I asked a question and they actually were defensive and refused to listen to the question, which to me was an indication you're not listening to the market. If you can't listen to me and respond, that's a problem. And if you don't know the answer to the question because you've never heard it or haven't thought about it, say, you know what, that's a great question. Can I understand why you're asking it? That's really great. I don't know the answer. Can I get back to you? And that thoughtful response is more important than you trying to BS something. So if there's one thing I'm going to say, Q&A is really critical, and please use it. Most investors have a lot of pattern recognition. And I think you heard that from Habib and Jason, is we just, have seen a lot of things, and there's a reason why we're asking what we're asking. So please, find out why we're asking, what the root cause is, and don't be there to defend, your product or your company.
Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah, those are, all great points. Completely agree. One, additional thing that I love to see from founding teams is, what is your vision for sort of 5-10 years out, particularly in tough tech? It might be 5 years or more, until you're in the market. And so why is what you're building today, why does that make sense for the world as it will be in, 5+ years? What are the fundamental trends that are shifting the landscape of the industry that you're going into? How are incumbents approaching or not approaching the same problem? And why is what you're building going to make even more sense in 5 to 10 years than it does right now? And I think those teams that have that vision and are able to communicate to basically the fact that they're skating to where the puck is going, I think they have an additional advantage in their storytelling, not just to the folks who are going to support them, but also to the team that they're going to build around them of employees and partners. It's a fantastic thing when a team can really communicate that well.
Yeah, I think they're all excellent points. I want to shift to the angel investors, because you're all at one point are still angel investors, and being in the VC world. And I am curious to know, when it comes to deep tech, what are some of the challenges you would think of angel investors actually investing in deep tech, if any?
I think the biggest is a long timeline and a long horizon, right? And so angel investors, right? They, oftentimes are making much smaller investments. That's where angel, and the amount of money that's required for the next stage is usually much greater, and it keeps escalating when you're in deep tech. And there's a very long timeline around it. So I think as an angel investor, it's really do you strongly believe in the value proposition that person is talking about, right? Do you have the patience to wait 10 years out for your money to potentially get back to you, if at all? And then do you also have faith that this person can do additional raises? Which is why for me Q&A is so important, because in the angel round, right, friends and family, it's really small. It's when, especially deep tech, the further along you go, the more money you need, and you have to believe this person is convincing enough that they're going to be able to get other people on the bandwagon with them. And so it's really the time horizon, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Yep. Okay, so I have to bring this up because in 2019 we had all-time high of female founder getting funded by 2.8%. Huge number. And unfortunately in 2020 it dropped back to 2.3. And I was looking around to see for deep tech if there is any specific data, and I don't see anything out there. But I'm curious if from just your experience, is there's also variabilities when it comes to female founders and deep tech?
Well, I'll happy to sort of jump in initially and just speak to climate tech. So, our firm is founded and run by two women, and we're just launching the firm now. We have 28 years of experience between the two of us, but the actual firm is quite new. But I can say that in the nearly 20 companies we've invested in prior, as angels and as venture investors, we've invested in 40% of the teams we've invested in have a female co-founder. So I don't know if that's specific to climate tech, but we are seeing really, really amazing teams founded or co-founded by women, and a lot of women technical founders, who did their PhD in the subject in which they're building the company. Mm-hmm. Tough to say, what factors are driving that. I mean, I certainly think that this space, given the moral imperative to stabilize the climate, I think attracts perhaps a slightly different set of folks than maybe, enterprise SaaS does. And, I think we're also benefiting from a wave of really incredible talent that over the past sort of 5, 6, 7 years, as the climate crisis has become more and more apparent, I think more and more folks have decided to do their PhD in an area relevant to stabilizing the climate and decarbonizing the global economy. Mm-hmm. Have decided to leave their jobs at, Google or Facebook or wherever to go work on these problems. And so, for whatever reasons, I think this attracts a really diverse group of founders. And we have been seeing a lot of just incredible female founders, which we are, of course, tremendously excited about.
That's great to hear. Yep. And we need probably more VCs, females as well. That helps.
That being said, the numbers are far from where they need to be. And since 2019, you mentioned it's an all-time high. The percentage of funding going to both female investors and female founders has dropped, which is abysmal. And we all need to do, a huge amount of work to counter that. So the talent is there. And that's I think, very, very encouraging. And sort of the rest of us need to do more in terms of, really tracking the numbers and building the ecosystem to make sure that more and more fantastic female founders are getting the funding that they deserve.
Yep. And, that actually, it's a good pivot to the ecosystem, because I really would like to hear from you guys, because when I look around, I think it's, I want to say, Jason, you guys are only investing in Massachusetts, right? And Michael only also in the Boston area for the engine. Habib, I think you guys are global of the way you would invest. And I think, Sarah, you said, guys, you are as well. So when we talk about, building ecosystems, and I think, Vanessa, you probably deal with that a lot with the government works also that you do between the private and public sectors. Can you speak about actually the importance of the ecosystem when it comes to deep tech? Does it really matter where you're at regionally, and how does all these systems connect together?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, it absolutely is extremely critical ecosystem. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Boston. Boston is my home base, but in my alternative life, I've also spent time building a venture fund, one of the first venture funds in the Middle East. And that's a place where ecosystem was lacking. And that's a place where I could also compare and contrast and say when there's no ecosystem, how disadvantageous this for founders. And I think, so one is the community of founders, other founders to talk with, other founders to bump into. The spaces, physical spaces is something extremely, extremely, important for deep tech companies and labs, experts and the corporates. And that's something that we're privileged to have around the MIT ecosystem in Boston as well. But also there's often leveraging existing programs, government programs, grant programs, and that's something as well that we see. The last thing is, which is really something that people are wrapping their head around, is with remote work specifically is just arbitraging talent cost and where talent should be and wants to be. So what we're finding a pattern of some of our founders, because we get to meet them early on campus, they're deciding if they want to go back. Some of our companies went back to Israel because food tech is big in Israel, or a company went back to the Netherlands because this is where the home of ag and greenhouse farming, and they just wanted to go back home during the pandemic, and why not start a company, and off we go, start a company. So we're seeing a lot of more movement, I would say, in the last 2 years than we had seen before. Also governments back home. So Greek founders of ours decided to move back to Greece because the Greek government has a big incentive for the type of lab equipment that he wants to build, and he had that. So that's something that we're seeing. Although that, to go back to your first question, ecosystems are extremely important. I think everyone on this call is playing an amazing role in this Boston ecosystem. I remember when I was a founder 25 years ago here in Boston, it was kind of lonely to be a founder, especially in the consumer internet space. Now it's really great to have everyone as well, kind of work together in harmony on this.
Yeah, and we're here right now at DOE. We absolutely do have a focus on kind of regional ecosystems. In my department, Office of Technology Transitions, we have a program called Energy Program for Innovation Clusters, EPIC, where we've awarded 30 awards to incubators and accelerators across the nation to help them actually catalyze innovation hubs and the startups that are in their arena. We also last week launched Project Leap at DOE, which is really to help communities transition to clean energy. So we're actually going to be providing technical assistance to allow that to happen. And so really it's important for us to think about how do we drive economic development in various areas. And Boston is amazing, but there's a lot of places between Boston and Silicon Valley that we need to activate. And so really that's what we're trying to do here is, right, we can't have in the US just the innovation clustered in a couple of key areas. And we're really, really focused on driving and activating all these other great cities between the coasts as well. And so we're really excited about the work we're doing here because if you've spent any time in the US, there's amazing innovators and startups all across the country.
And just to echo that, there are so many opportunities. I focus particularly on Massachusetts, but we are looking outside of what we say Route 128. But a couple of statistics about the opportunity here. There have been over 8,000 STEM doctor and master's degrees granted in Massachusetts every year. 20% of those degrees are given to Black and Latinx students. 24% of those go to women. So the opportunity and the talent here is huge. And part of that is being in the community, being in the network, as Habib mentioned. We love to go to MIT. We love to go to Harvard. We love to go to UMass Lowell. We love to go to WPI and see where the opportunities are. And I'll put this in the chat later. I should have mentioned this in the very beginning. We have a grant program for companies that have received phase 2 or equivalent SBIR funding. It's a grant of up to $800K, and it helps companies commercialize technology. So this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, but that's a way that we try to stay within the community and get to know some of the universities, colleges, and some of this technology that's coming out of our region.
Just to echo here, I mean, I think Habib really hit the nail on the head with like the set of the mixture of things necessary for an ecosystem really take off. And we've seen it, there's a whole bunch of research going back to Silicon Valley in the 90s, looking at Kendall Square kind of in the last 20 years. I think what's really interesting is how do we actually gauge whether or not what we're doing is working as we're trying to build these ecosystems. And one thing just anecdotally that I would put out there is the market, right? The labor market for for these companies in life sciences over the last 20 years, you've seen executives from major corporates leaving their position to take startup CEO and executive jobs. I'm going to say up through 2016, 2017, did not see that. We don't see it in other spaces. Mm-hmm. In the last year and a half, in climate, in some of these other areas, there's been a lot more mobility among those folks coming into this area and taking on some of those senior leadership roles in tough tech startups, which is I think that shows that it is suggestive that this is working. I think more importantly is if you have a whole bunch of startups in the area that are doing really, really well, the risk of going to join any one of those startups is much lower because you've got the opportunity to pivot to a different one. And so I think I'm also seeing our teams are having an easier job hiring because, you're not taking on the risk that's traditionally associated with a startup when you are in an ecosystem that is blossoming. And so that's super important for what's happening in Massachusetts. At the Engine, most of our portfolio is in Massachusetts. We have some investments outside where connectivity between ecosystems can be valuable. So Houston, for example, for some of our climate companies is really important. But we're definitely seeing the growth of the ecosystem here, and it's super positive.
That's great. I would love to continue this conversation. You guys have an amazing knowledge we can talk for another few hours, but I do want to leave some time we have a few questions in the queue that I would like to get to. So from Angelique, she's asking, what's your approach to building a team of trusted subject matter experts?
I'll just jump in really quick. So for us, we have this, as I mentioned, the START program. And a part of that process is judging some of the technologies that go through that program. And we try to build networks with those folks. And some of these people are entrepreneurs who are in the space, a lot of PhDs and professors to help us. It's really just creating those relationships and the credibility and the dialogue early on to make sure that you have key subject matter experts in specific areas. And so we try to look at a couple of key areas similar to the Engine. So at a very high level, we look at folks who are in materials, nanotech, quantum computing, advanced manufacturing, robotics, and just to name a few, and make sure that we have 2 to 3 people that we can kind of reach out to given the type of technology.
Okay. Christopher's asking, from your perspective, would you rather see deep innovation within a technology or shallow innovation applied in a domain?
That's a great question. I mean, I think from my perspective, I think about the opportunity that is created by the innovation itself. And so in some fields, like commodity markets, if you have I'm going to use incremental innovation, that actually may open up a massive opportunity. So I'm thinking in, for example, PV, solar PV, right? If you can get the cost down from $15 a megawatt hour to $10 a megawatt hour, that's a big deal, and that's going to be a game changer, right? That could be an incremental innovation, but oftentimes I think there's probably more of a correlation between kind of big jumps in technical approaches with big opportunities on the other side.
Okay. And Barbara is asking, is there's any comments around the investment environment around virtual reality? It's a hot topic, and any thoughts on that?
Maybe I take a quick stab. Although we don't invest in pure consumer, so what we've seen as VR in our case has been mostly around the application of virtual reality and things like cross-team collaboration. A company of ours called Spatial has built operating system of VR collaboration. But one particular company that I would want to mention is working in augmented reality and then in VR as well, is a company that's working in a very different space that one would imagine when you think of these buzzwords. It's a company called Tulip, based here in Boston. And Tulip really is digitizing the factory floor, have customers like Steelcase and Boeing and these companies. And initially what it started with is an innovation that was done at the Media Lab in the mid-90s around transforming a table into a user interface. So it was a big projector that would project something on a table, would move things around like a giant iPad, and then it would just detect things. It was such a cool thing that at that time, people would walk around and say, why would you ever use something like that? Now, fast forward 15 years later, Steelcase, a member of the Media Lab, was walking in the Media Lab and said, oh, interesting. Why won't you apply this on our factory floor? Because then you can help our workers assemble things the right way. If they put the wrong leg of the table in the wrong box, you'll tell them, oh, warning. And so the founder had this idea, and then he spun out. He went to Jabil, another electronics company, member of the Media Lab, And there he built their first product. And today the company just raised about $1 billion worth of company. And they've taken something that might be seemingly too far in the future to be applied, but took that and found a very strong narrow pain point. In this case, it is factory floor, it's quantification of complex tasks, and built a great company around that. And I would encourage everyone as well who's thinking about using sometimes technology that might take a while, or where the team doesn't have the experience to take it to consumers, to think about the marketing and everything around it and all the expenses you have to put there. If you're a deep tech team and you know well how to build a company, think about a pain point that's more narrower, whether it's healthcare, climate tech as well, or industrial automation, and try to find a pain point that really matches what you're working at. And I think that's something that Vanessa maybe mentioned earlier on this call as well.
Yeah. And actually, to that point, that question makes me think of, are there a trend in deep tech? Do you see trend? And I think of a trend as the technology is being used, but it's also the spending. Like when I look at like 3D printing, where now you see a lot more spending happening in later stage, where others it's like an early stage. Do you see trends that happen? Or maybe not.
Yeah. I was just, because I talked a lot. I was just being silent for someone else to take it. I can take that. Did you mean trends in investing or trends in spending of the companies themselves?
No, in investing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's a big trend of solving. I think deep tech investors at heart are impact investors. We think of tackling big problems. I think Michael said it very well on the beginning of this call. It's about solving some of the world's toughest problems. And today, one of the world's toughest problems is, how can we be ready for a world with climate? Climate is actually, climate change and making sure we're both preparing for it, but also adjusting after the fact. And I think a lot of our investments have gone into that space, whether it's on the material science side, on the ag space. And something that we see out, and other trends as well that we see across is sometimes driven by things like the pandemic has pushed a lot RNA technologies and has actually improved the interest in that. So a lot of technologies we're looking a lot into that space. Trickled down by the big funds, actually pushing up the earlier funds to also take more risk earlier. There's a lot sometimes that you see these dynamics play out from a macro perspective, not just only from a VC perspective.
One other trend I wanted to just highlight is that I'm seeing a trend that companies, big strategic, big private, public companies are looking to get in spaces. They've appointed now chief sustainability officers over the last 5 years, which I've never seen before. I've spoken to many of them. We have no idea how we're going to meet our climate goals. The CEOs made these commitments, and we now have 300 million. There's one company that has $2 billion to actually start investing in technology so they can meet their climate commitments. So I think for many startups, that's a really important thing to realize is public companies, big companies now have dollars that are going towards this.
That's awesome. And I know we have only 2 minutes, but I want to make sure we get to the last question from, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's Sayantani. It said, can the panel advise on how to find the right VC partner for a specific deep tech?
Well, I can get us started. I feel like this is a great group of people to ask that question to. So, your investors think of them as partners, right? I mean, yes, they provide capital, but they should be providing more than that, and they should be supporting you on your journey for the next 10 plus years. So work with people you want to work with folks you respect, folks who know your space or, broadly are fantastic at company building and can truly be helpful. Folks who, depending on what your capital raise needs will be in the future, have a great network of co-investors that they can help you raise in the future from. And so how do you find those people? Well, look at who's backing the other companies that you respect. That's a good place to start. Who are the top VCs in your field? If it's, pharma, ag tech, deep tech. And then, look at the firm, look at their track record. You can do references on VCs as well. Talk to founders they've invested in, if you're serious about approaching them. And, really find through this process, put together the syndicate of partners that's going to be most helpful to you.
And when in doubt, call Jason because he went to divinity school.
Let's pray.
Well, in closing, I really would like to thank you, a great panelist, for this early in the morning. This was very entertaining and a lot of good knowledge sharing. So I really appreciate that. And I hope the audience also benefited from that. Just another reminder, if anybody have any resources that you want to share with our audience of things to look at, please drop it in the chat box. But, in the end of the day, the deep tech investment can be hugely rewarding. So it can be life-changing for therapies or saving our planets or, many other things. It has a lot of risk in it. And I really hope the session today really helped you with some of those some of your thoughts about or why not would you invest in that. And with that, Hani, that is 9 sharp. I hope that's it. We're on time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you all so much. Really, really enjoyed that panel. As I said at the beginning, we have a bunch of other great panels coming up. So for all the attendees and the panelists, feel free to head to the agenda to see the next panels are starting at 9:15. So thank you all. And for the panelists, be sure to switch to backstage and then exit. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Great. Are we good?